Brothers and sisters of Africa, and friends of freedom around the world. Today, I speak not only as a soldier, but as a human being who has witnessed his comrades rise against fear and be called rebels by their own government. I looked into the eyes of Officer John Charles Tesha, and in them, I saw the same flame I once saw in the eyes of the soldiers of Burkina Faso, those who chose to stand with their people rather than bow before injustice. That flame, once ignited, no nation on earth can ever extinguish. Tanzania, a land once revered by the entire continent as the lighthouse of Africa. It was the place where Julius Nyerere, the spiritual father of the nation, once stood and declared, "Freedom is not the national anthem sung every morning, but the loaf of bread shared fairly on the table of every poor family." End quote. He taught us that freedom does not reside in slogans, but in the righteousness of every policy, in the voice of the farmer being heard within the parliament, and in the belief that power must serve the people, never subdue them. Yet today, when I look toward Tanzania, I no longer see the light of that lighthouse. I see only the darkness of fear spreading over streets once filled with hope. The people's faith, once the very soul of this nation, is being suffocated day by day, hour by hour, by the hands that hold power in the name of stability. I see a government led by a woman, and I once wanted to believe that it was a new milestone for Africa, a symbol of justice, empathy, and compassion. But then I realized, gender does not create conscience, and the image of a progressive female leader cannot be used as a veil to conceal the betrayal of our most sacred values. I am not against women. I stand with every courageous woman, those raising children in poverty, working the dry fields, demanding the right to live in fairness. But I stand against anyone, man or woman alike, who dares to turn the image of women into a political instrument, using the people's trust as a mask for repression and control. When journalists are forbidden to speak, when students are arrested for posting a single sentence online, when those who dare to tell the truth are branded enemies of the state, then every speech about progress becomes a mockery. Man or woman no longer matters. What matters is where you stand, on the side of light or among the ranks of darkness. And then they proudly declare victory with 99% of the votes. But I tell them this, 99% is not the proof of love, but the confession of fear. A society where no one dares to choose differently, where the ballot is no longer a right, but an obligation, that democracy has long been dead, leaving only an empty ritual painted to beautify tyranny. I speak these words not in anger, but with the deep sorrow of an African brother witnessing the fading light of a land once radiant with hope. Because today, in Tanzania, 83 people have disappeared. No explanation, no statement, no official report. Only 83 flickering lamps remain in the night, where mothers, fathers, wives, and children still wait for a knock on the door that will never come. Numbers can be hidden, but pain cannot. These are not 83 cases. They are 83 stories robbed of their endings. 83 families living in silence, where every moment of waiting is an invisible sentence. When a government chooses silence, that silence becomes a crime. When the press is gagged, when writers are threatened simply for asking questions, the truth is no longer buried, it is executed. And when the world is no longer allowed to listen, the cries in Tanzania's night will dissolve into the wind, unheard, unremembered. I want to say this directly, without diplomacy or detours. President Samia Suluhu Hassan, you are the first woman to hold power in that nation, and because of that, you once carried the hope of millions of African women. But if your power is built on fear, on disappearances without explanation, on shuttered newspapers and silenced voices, then history will not call you the first female president, but the first to strangle the hope of East Africa. You may choose to keep hiding the truth, but remember this, no wall is thick enough to block the light, and no government is strong enough to stop a people from awakening. The death of President John Magufuli remains an unhealed wound, not only in the hearts of the Tanzanian people, but in the hearts of all who once believed in a self-reliant Africa. He was not a perfect leader, but he dared to do what few ever would. Challenge the old order, say no to the binding loans of the IMF, reject dependence on foreign aid, and force multinational corporations to return to the people of Tanzania their fair share of the nation's natural wealth. They called him the bulldozer, the machine that clears the old path, because he believed that a nation can only hold its head high when it takes control of its own destiny. He compelled international gold mining companies to renegotiate their contracts, banned the import of industrial waste from Europe, and placed the interests of farmers, workers, and teachers above the glittering promises of outsiders. He once said, "We are not poor. We are only made to believe we are poor so that others can become rich." And then, during the COVID-19 pandemic, while the world was paralyzed by fear, he chose his own path, rejecting lockdowns, resisting vaccine pressure from the West, and calling on his people to place their faith in God and in indigenous science. Right or wrong, brave or reckless, let history decide. But one thing is undeniable. He dared to be independent. And that very courage made his death a question that has never been transparently answered. On the 17th of March, 2021, the government announced that he had died of chronic heart disease. Yet for 3 weeks before that, he had vanished from public view. No images, no videos, no independent confirmation. The entire nation was consumed by rumors, and to this day, no official investigation has ever been released. He left in silence. No true national mourning, no farewell worthy of a man who once gave millions of Africans a reason to be proud. And today, I must ask, not out of malice, but from the sorrow of a brother, why, Madam Samia, why fear the truth so much? The truth does not kill a nation. It is concealment that kills the people's faith. For truth is the lamp, and once that lamp is lit, it will shine into the dark corners where power wishes no one to look. You may extinguish that lamp for a day, a month, or a year, but you cannot extinguish the light that still burns in the hearts of those who remember John Magufuli, the man who once dared to say, "We can stand on our own." You speak of reform, of development, of progress, but while those words echo on television, the motherland of Tanzania is being carved piece by piece, not for your people, but for foreign corporations, those who know oil, gas, lithium, gold, and rare earths, yet know nothing of the children dying of thirst upon the richest lands of East Africa. I have read the contracts signed in the shadows, where mining zones like Kabanga, Lake Rukwa, and Ngaka were handed over to foreign companies in deals never consulted with the people. I see the lithium and nickel projects in the south, resources that could bring prosperity to millions of Tanzanians, instead becoming profit machines for corporations from Britain, Canada, and Australia, while local communities remain in poverty and the environment suffers irreparable destruction. You speak of development, but development for whom? When farmers lose their fields, when fishermen are driven from their lakes, when young people abandon their homeland because hope no longer lives there, that is not progress. That is the second colonization, only dressed in the costume of international investment. Democracy cannot exist if the nation's resources do not belong to its people. Because democracy is not the ballots counted on television. Democracy is when the people can see their lives improve through what their country truly owns. If resources are stolen, if the national budget is drained by foreign hands, then democracy becomes nothing more than an empty slogan in the mouths of the powerful. I have seen this in Burkina Faso. We too were once poor, once fearful, once bound by cooperation agreements that were in truth chains. The gold mining companies came, carrying flags and money, but they did not bring schools or hospitals. We once believed that kneeling was the only way to survive, until the day we understood that no one respects a nation that always bows its head. And when we said enough, when we reclaimed control of our resources, managed our own mines, and forced foreign companies to share profits fairly, the West trembled. Not because Burkina Faso became richer, but because we became free. They are afraid, because they know this. Once Africa learns to stand, no one can command us again. Not with aid, not with debt, not with fear. I do not call for a coup in Tanzania. I do not call for the army to take up arms against its own people. I only call for remembrance. Remember that power does not belong to the chair, but to the people. Those who rise at dawn to work, to feed their children, to keep this nation standing, even though they are never invited to sit in the grand halls of privilege. Remember that a soldier is not born to protect a throne, but to protect life, justice, and human dignity. When a government begins to fear the truth, when the people's voice becomes a threat, then that government no longer belongs to the people, it belongs to fear. For a government born of the people must live for the people, and can only survive through the people's trust. Once that trust is lost, every palace of power becomes nothing more than hollow walls. If journalists are imprisoned simply for asking questions, then it is no longer democracy. It is a prison decorated with slogans. And if a man like John Charles Tesha one who dares to speak truth, to question, to stand tall, is called a rebel, then perhaps the very word rebel has lost its meaning. For in a nation where telling the truth becomes a crime, silence itself is complicity. And if we remain silent today, then tomorrow no one will have the courage to speak. I say this to those in the West, especially to Americans, those who have witnessed war, who have seen their friends fall in defense of the word freedom. I speak to you not in reproach, but in remembrance. Never believe that democracy is merely a ballot dropped into a box or a speech delivered every election season. Democracy is the courage to say no to falsehood, even when it leaves us alone, attacked, or paying a heavy price. For if truth is no longer spoken, even the oldest democracies will rot from within. I do not claim that Burkina Faso is a perfect example. We are still learning, still stumbling, still healing from the wounds of poverty, division, and war. But there is one thing I can say with all pride. We are not afraid of dialogue. We are not afraid of transparency. We dare to let the people ask questions, and we dare to answer even when those answers make the government uncomfortable. Because we have learned after too many years of silence that truth, though painful, is nobler than a comforting lie. A lie may bring temporary peace, but only truth can build lasting trust. And that is why the people of Burkina Faso still stand firm. Not because we are strong, but because we no longer fear the light. For in the darkness of this world, sometimes a single honest flame, no matter how small, is enough to guide an entire nation back to itself. Tanzania, our brothers, you are not alone. Your blood beats in rhythm with the blood of those who once rose in Ouagadougou, Bamako, Niamey, and Khartoum. We do not fight to seize thrones. We fight to restore the dignity of the human being. One day, men like Tesha will no longer be called rebels. They will be called by their true name, patriots. For love of country does not lie in bowing before power, but in daring to speak the truth when all others remain silent. Africa does not need more symbols of authority, no gilded chairs, no flags waving above the barrels of guns, no hollow oaths. Africa needs truth. A truth that cannot be bought, cannot be imprisoned, and needs no permission to be spoken. For when one soldier speaks the truth, power trembles. When two soldiers speak the language of freedom, an entire continent begins to awaken. And when millions begin to whisper the same words that we will no longer bow, then no tyranny, no empire can stop the dawn of Africa.